This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it, and that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Alex Heublein on the show. He is the president of the U.S. division of Netsurit, and we're going to be talking about what they do and how generative AI and some of those technologies are benefiting and working with small to medium businesses. Anyway, Alex, welcome to the show.
John, thanks for having me on the show, man. This is great.
Yeah, if you don't mind, tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today in your career, and what is it that you do?
That's a loaded question. It's a loaded question, and there's a fairly long answer to that. So yeah, we'll kind of go back to the beginning a little bit, because I kind of evolved in my career maybe in a different way than I had anticipated originally. I started off as a software engineer, so I went to school, got a computer science degree, and my aspirations in life were to go out and create new solutions with software. I was kind of in the first wave of kids that grew up with computers, or at least when I got to be about 9 or 10 years old, personal computing had become a thing, at least on small scale. And so I was a bit of a computer nerd, and went to school, did computer science, and then set off on my journey to go write software, which was great, and I loved doing it. Had a great time doing it. But as I evolved through my career, it was interesting that I was given the opportunity. And I was very lucky in my career to have been given the opportunity to go try some new things and to maybe get outside my comfort zone. And I think that's made all the difference in the world for me, because as I sort of progressed through my career, a lot of people kind of looked at me and said, "Why don't you go give this a try?" One of my very first jobs out of school was writing software, and they took me out to a customer one day to go look at some of their how they were implementing our software. And they found I could speak in complete sentences and actually talk to people. And so I immediately got thrown into pre-sales. I was a pre-sales engineer for that particular company thereafter. So it's been kind of a series of interesting coincidences and a lot of great people that kind of said, you know what, why don't you try some other things? So that's evolved into computer architecture, software design, did that for a long time. And then I got the opportunity to be more strategic, so I got to spend a lot of time looking at sort of how does technology impact the business, both internally and externally for customers. So spent a lot of time in consulting, and then sort of mid-career, I decided, and what I really realized about myself was that it wasn't so much writing software that I was interested in; it was much more about creating things.
Yeah,
and there's only so much you can create on your own. So kind of got into management that way, went back to school, got an MBA, didn't have enough, got a doctorate in business administration as well, and then kind of shifted my focus more onto the business side. And how can we take technology and use it in ways that maybe we hadn't thought of before? And how do we align sort of the IT and the software engineering world more with the business world? So it's been quite of an interesting transition. And so my role today at Netsurit, we're about a 450, 500 person IT service provider. So we do infrastructure services and outsourced IT for our customers. We do cybersecurity, and then we also do something that we call we have an offering called Innovate X, which is really about taking some of the new and emerging technologies out there, like generative AI. And our question is sort of, how do you take those technologies from the enterprise, which is where a lot of funding is going, a lot of people are very interested in how to use these technologies in the enterprise space, Our question now is, how do you bring those technologies down market into the small and medium business space? Because when you think about it, small and medium businesses, their big advantage over their bigger, maybe more well-heeled competitors is that they can move fast. They can be very agile. They can be very nimble. And as we see some of these technologies taking off and really changing almost on a weekly or monthly basis, the breakthroughs that we're seeing in AI, our focus is on how do we take that technology, democratize it, bring it into the small and medium business world, because they're the ones that can consume it rapidly. They're the ones that can pivot very quickly as the technology pivots and use that as a competitive advantage for them out in the marketplace. So yeah, long, very winding path to where I've gotten to now, but it's very exciting stuff.
Yeah, no, I think the generative AI stuff is super exciting, but I'm curious, going back just a little bit on a personal note, why you decided to go through with a PhD? Do you have like some plan of teaching sometime, or is it just, you were fascinated and wanted to keep going?
Well, it's kind of twofold. One is I think my retirement job is going to be teaching. I enjoy teaching. I do some part-time work at one of the local universities in Atlanta, and I just have a great time doing it. I love seeing younger people, kind of get it. That moment where you see a student and they get it and they grasp what you're trying to get across to them. It's a great feeling. So that was one of my motivations. My other motivation was, I realized sort of mid-career that I was a pretty deep and broad technologist, but I really didn't know as much as I needed to about the business world. Mm-hmm. So I went and did an MBA, and I got done with that, and I realized, wow, now I know how ignorant I really am about this stuff. So went back, did a PhD, and it was a lot of fun. I'm not sure it's something I'd want to do again, but I'm glad I did it because I learned a lot. I got to spend a lot of time with some great, not only great professors, but great people that were also students in the program that I was in. And I probably learned as much from them and their practical real world experience as I learned, from the sort of more formal theoretical professors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I teach part-time at Winthrop University. I've been teaching now for 15 years part-time. And it's one of the things that I'm going to do when I retire, I guess you would say. When I'm done with the corporate world, then teaching is going to be how I keep my mind sharp, for sure.
Yep.
So getting back into the generative AI, you mentioned that small, medium businesses kind of are more nimble and more able to change. What are some of the things that people are trying today? Because you hear about ChatGPT, you hear about Copilot and some of the basics, but what are companies really able to take advantage of that really move the needle when it comes to ROI?
Yeah, well, so I think you can categorize those things into two areas. So one area that I look at is sort of personal productivity, and I think that's what gets a lot of the media attention. How do I use these technologies to summarize emails, to transcribe meeting notes that I've been on a Zoom call or a Teams call or whatever? So I think there's a fair bit of personal productivity. How do I build better PowerPoint decks? How do I answer questions? How do I maybe do some light research using generative AI? And so I think those are sort of individual level productivity oriented things that people are using generative AI for. I think when you look at it, maybe the second way of looking at it is more of either a team level, department level, or even company level initiatives that are designed to go out and either, make their people more productive across the board. That's one area that we see a lot of. The second area that we see a lot of is, how do I take some of the business processes that have been in place that I've tried to sort of digitize in the past, but how do I imbue those with a lot more intelligent decision making within those workflows? So we see a fair bit of that, and that can take a lot of different forms. We see a lot of people also, and I think this is fairly recent, not a recent trend, but recent usage of the technology, is how do I make sense of the data that I have in my organization? And sort of traditionally, we've looked at that and said, well, how do I create dashboards? How do I go after reports? How do I create some insights from the data that I have? But most of that data is structured data. It's stuff that lives in nicely formatted tables or within relational databases or what have you. And I think the thing that generative AI is bringing to us now in terms of data insights is to be able to reason across not only that structured data, but all of the unstructured data that I have within my organization that I generate as a result of doing business. So this could be policies and procedures that I've written down. It could be documents that I have to process, but they're not sort of in that nicely structured environment. So we're seeing a lot more companies that are interested in saying, how do I reason across all of my data? Because if you look at unstructured data, it's probably for most companies, it's 80 to 90% of all the data that they have, right? And again, it could be in a SharePoint repository and there's 10,000 documents in there. How do I get some insights out of all this information that I've captured that isn't nicely structured? So I think that's an area we're seeing more and more interest in, is that ability to reason across both structured and unstructured data and treat them as equals, as opposed to unstructured data being kind of supplementary to the structured data. And then I think the most interesting area I think right now that's emerging is, how do I use AI, and in particular generative AI, to do things I've just never been able to do in the past, or I've never been able to do these things cost effectively. So we're seeing use cases like, how do I go out and make complex product and service recommendations to my customers where I might have hundreds or even thousands of products that might be appropriate for them? How do I help them select the right ones that will meet their unique business requirements? Just as an example. So it's not just about how do I get more insights, how do I make people more productive, but now it's moving into how do I use this as a competitive force to give me capabilities that actually truly distinguish and differentiate my business out there. And that's really sort of emerging as some of these models get smarter and smarter.
Are there any industries that you see that are like adapting faster and adopting, I guess would be the better word, these practices a little faster than others? Because I know, like, when I look back on it, my mind immediately goes to cybersecurity, because you've been seeing, like you talked about unstructured data. We have all these events that happen, login events, usage events, what is normal, what is unnormal. And I know, like, a lot of cybersecurity companies have kind of used machine learning and AI for several years now to kind of predict, like, algorithmically, like, something's happening. Like, this user typically only, uploads, 50 gigs a day, and today they uploaded a terabyte. What's going on? And can alert of unusual patterns. What are some other industries that are really adopting to the use of AI, especially when he talks about, unstructured data?
Well, I think it's an interesting balance you have to strike in a lot of industries, right? So you have sort of the highly regulated industries. You've got healthcare, you've got financial services, you've got insurance, et cetera. And I think they're very, very interested in using generative AI, but they have some concerns about data propagation and about who can view what. So I think they're actually less concerned about the cybersecurity aspect of it. In terms of their chatbots or whatever getting hacked. I think they're much more concerned about, how do we make sure that as we create these agents, these AI-based agents that can reason across vast quantities of data, how do we make sure that the right people are getting the right information that they have access to or they're privy to, and make sure that not everybody gets access to that information. So it's kind of around information governance. We see a lot of concerns there, particularly in the regulated industries. But honestly, we're seeing what we found is that we had an idea of what industries we thought would be the big adopters of generative AI. And what we're finding as we go in and work with more and more customers, we're finding that there's no shortage of use cases. I mean, every customer we go into, we sit down, we talk to them, tell us about some of the challenges you're having. What are some of the opportunities out there? And we actually find more use cases than they can afford to do at any given time. So I think there's a very broad base of support, and there's a very broad base of use cases that you can hit on. But I think one of the areas that we find really interesting is that a lot of people just don't know what they don't know. We'll go in, we'll start talking to them, and not only do they not know what the capabilities of generative AI are today, but they also don't know, like, what it can't do. So you'll get people saying, well, I don't really understand what this thing can do. And then we do some envisioning and sort of art of the possible sessions with them. But then you have people that sort of have an equal level of misunderstanding or just lack of knowledge, and they think these things can do more than they can. So it's kind of striking the right balance. So a lot of it is about choosing the right use cases and making sure you avoid some of the, what I'll call maybe more dangerous use cases for generative AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen some people like go way out there with things that AI, like, oh, we should invest in this because it can do this. I'm like, it's not quite there yet, you know.
Yeah. I want something that will read my customers' minds. Well, we're not quite there.
Yeah, exactly.
Close, but yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it go so far as like, well, instead of like, having local news, we could just have generative AI like be the newscatchers, find the stories, interview the people, and just create it all. I'm like, doesn't work that way yet.
Maybe someday, but not.
Maybe if you had a good writer, kind of, massage your stories a little bit, but like, not quite there yet.
Yeah.
So it's always fun to talk about like what are the possibilities when you go through the art of possible. But let's talk about some of the failures because that's always interesting as well. Like, what are some things that people have tried that maybe didn't work out the way they thought they would, and maybe we're not quite there yet, but we have opportunities to get there in the future? And what are some things that you have seen along the way that you can kind of caution some of our listeners about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the first ones, and I think this is really important to recognize about AI in general, but in particular with generative AI, is that you really don't want to try to use it for problem spaces where you need a very, very deterministic answer. And by deterministic, I mean, if I give you these inputs, I'll get exactly the same output, or I'll get exactly the same recommendation, or I'll get exactly the same business process that works exactly the same way. Because the nature of generative AI and the nature of a lot of AI and machine learning initiatives is that they're non-deterministic by nature. I mean, that's not a bug. It's kind of a feature of these things, which gives them a ton of flexibility and a ton of potential creativity. But, it's like the old saying, I don't want my finance department getting too creative. So, you definitely do, you have to be cautious when you're dealing with situations where you need 100% accuracy or 99.99% accuracy. Those generally aren't great use cases for AI, at least not at this point, because you still get hallucinations. You still get situations where you're going to get back answers that aren't perfect. And if your business process or the use case that you've designated for AI needs that level of precision and that level of consistency and accuracy, then you probably don't want to choose those use cases. So I like to talk about self-driving cars, and there have been plenty of people that have gotten up over the last 6 or 7 years and say, we're going to have fully self-driving cars, though we'll see those by 2020 or 2021, and yet we still don't have them. And part of the reason we still don't have, fully self-autonomous vehicles that AI can drive perfectly is it's not so much that we can't do that. It's that how good are they, right? Like you're not going to get in a car that's AI driven if there's a 1% chance that you might get in a serious car accident in that vehicle, right? Because that means 1 in every 100 times you get in a car, you're going to have a serious accident. So you want that level of precision, that level of accuracy to get more like 99.999%. And so doing that has been challenging with again, for instance, self-driving cars or autonomous vehicles. So you have to understand the problem space you're going into when you're looking at the use cases for AI. The question you need to ask yourself is, how accurate and how perfect and how precise do I need the answers to be? And if that level of precision and accuracy starts to really get there into the 99 point something percent, you should probably reconsider. But if 90% is good enough, then you've got a real possibility on your hands.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Because there's been so many times where I've used models to create something, even if it's like images or something like that. And you may discover some abnormalities that you did not expect, some artifacts that show up that shouldn't be there, that, you've got to clean up and fix it. And,
right.
It's getting better and better, but it's not, like you said, if it's mission critical, 100% has to be accurate all the time, it's going to have some problems. But I mean, what today do we not have problems with, right? Everything's got to have a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah, you probably don't want it like doing your payroll for your company. I mean, it may be you mess that up, and people tend to get really upset.
Yeah.
So you want to have really deterministic responses. And one of the things we've also found is that when you look at kind of the universe of use cases, there are a ton of use cases that we see within businesses that are that it's fine to be 80% accurate or 90% accurate. And that may sound crazy at face value, but if I can do 80% or 90% of the work that a human would do, and then I still need an expert to come in and review the results and maybe make some corrections, I just think about the time that I've saved there, all the grunt work and the leg work. If I can get 90% of that done and then have a human expert finish the other 10%, that's great. It makes my people far more productive. It takes away a lot of the drudgery and a lot of the challenges they have in their roles, and lets them really focus their expertise on being an expert as opposed to dealing with all the data collection or whatever it is I need to go do. If I can make those solutions take away 80 or 90% of that work, then that's a win for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if they can come through, like you talked about data, they can come through the unstructured data and put it in a way that's usable. Even if they're not making the final decision on it, they're actually maybe filtering that down to the 20% that you need to pay attention to and getting rid of some of the.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's really, really valuable in a lot of circumstances.
So what are the top players when it comes to tools for things like this that are out there today that, small or medium business owners need to be focusing on? Who should they be engaging with to have these discussions?
Well, so, it's interesting because, I mean, there are what I'll call, there's the large language model providers like Microsoft and Google and OpenAI that I think are doing a pretty good job of generating tool sets. They're relatively easy to use, but there's a tremendous amount of technology that's coming out. There are so many AI startups out there that are kind of driving specific areas within the generative AI space and I think some of those companies will be around in a couple of years and some of them won't. Mm-hmm. We spent a lot of time with Microsoft. They've done a pretty good job with Copilot, and then a lot of people don't know that that there's Copilot Studio and there's Azure AI services that let us build these applications at more of a corporate level or a team level or department level. And that lets us do things like very, very intelligent business process automation. So I think that, kind of choosing vendors that can, you can work with that provide tools that are a lot easier to use, I think is important. And then I think there's sort of a lot of companies are like, wow, this is too complicated for me. I need someone to go off and do this. I need to outsource the development of these things. And I think that's where things get really interesting, because if you look at sort of traditional system integrators and consulting firms, they've got a lot of skills in this space. But the trick is, and this is one of the things that we really emphasize at Netsurit, is the idea that, hey, it's one thing to build these things, but then who's going to support them? Particularly if you're building things that really need that sort of 24/7 type of support. Like if this agent goes down, I've got a real problem on my hands within my business. Mm-hmm. So we look at it a little bit more comprehensively. It's not just about building generative AI solutions for our customers, but it's also about, how do I support those? How do I do it in a way that's going to give our customers confidence that these things are going to work, and they're going to work the right way over an extended period of time. The other thing that we do is we spend a lot of time doing optimization. So, for instance, if you were to look at, let's take OpenAI's GPT-4o model, very, very powerful when it came out, just fantastic capabilities, real generational leap in terms of what you can use it for. The problem is GPT-4o is fairly expensive to use when you start looking at it on a per token basis. So a couple months later, they came out with GPT-4o Mini. And GPT-4o Mini is an order of magnitude less expensive. Now, it's less capable, But as it turns out, for most of the use cases we're seeing, GPT-4o Mini is perfectly adequate, right? It can absolutely do the job just as effectively as the full-blown version of GPT-4o, but at a tenth of the cost. So as these models become more capable, as the cost of these models goes down over time, I think it's important to have a provider that can continuously optimize that. Otherwise, your inferencing costs are what become sort of the long pole in the tent, right? It's not just about cost of building these things. Now it's what are my ongoing inferencing costs? So that sort of combination of being able to build these things, support them, and then optimize them as you go forward, that goes beyond what most companies can deliver. And we think it's very, very important because that ongoing cost savings you get from putting in less expensive but just as capable models, as those models evolve, that reduces the long-term total cost of ownership on these.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's one thing that people don't, they don't struggle, or maybe they struggle to kind of realize the total cost when it comes to like who's going to support it, what's the ongoing maintenance, who's going to help train this model as things change. One of the basic ones that I've seen a lot of people advertise and kind of push through is, chatbots to help you with internal IT support. And that's great. That's useful. There's a lot of value there. But then as soon as, there's a OS update where everything changes, or you push a new build of your internal applications where the menu titles are different or something's different. Now, all that information that was trained has to be relearned.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of ongoing costs to it. And I think, back to your earlier point, we're seeing just tremendously positive ROI on the engagements that we're doing. And I think part of the reason for that is that building these things, is the cost of it is coming down tremendously. Like if you look at ChatGPT's new O1 model they released 2 or 3 weeks ago, in certain domains, it is unbelievably powerful. It has unbelievable reasoning capabilities. I mean, reasoning capabilities that probably go beyond what your average human can do. And they can also write code. So we're finding that to be just a massive leap. If you look at GPT-4o versus OpenAI O1, O1 is about 5 times better at writing code than GPT-4o. And so that's given us the ability to go out and not have to spend a ton of time writing code. We spend a lot more time today either using those tools to generate code, or we just use those tools to do a lot of very complex prompt engineering. And sort of prompt engineering is interesting because when that term first came out, I thought, what a ridiculous profession. Like I wouldn't want to describe myself as a prompt engineer. But as you start developing these things, what we're finding is that as we develop very complex prompts, they're really just algorithms. They're not, they're written in English, but there's still sort of the step-by-step, here's what I want you to go do, and here's the order in which I want you to do it, and here's the context in which I want you to go do it. So a lot of these prompts are actually sort of becoming the 21st century version of source code. Except now I don't have to write all the code. Now I don't have to worry about, I forgot the semicolon in this line or whatever. It can either generate the code or it can execute the algorithms that you're giving it in the prompts in a way that give you a ton of functionality.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where I think when you hit the nail on the head when you said it's the algorithm, and it really is. It's just another way of writing code. Back when I was learning software development, a long time ago, we used to have to start out with writing pseudocode, and I feel like that's a lot of what prompts are today. They're almost like pseudocode of how I want this thing to, or what I want to be achieved, and then it figures out the how behind it. And you kind of still have to have skills, when it comes to development to, like you mentioned before, proofread and check and double check and make sure that this is accurate and QC the code comes back. But the fact that you can generate it so much faster, it's got to be a real game changer, I think, as more companies adopt these.
Yeah, no, I like the way you characterize that, right? Because that's one of the first things you do, like in computer science school, is start with the pseudocode. Like, what is this thing? Because no amount of coding prowess will get you to where you need to be if you don't have the right sort of algorithmic thinking. So I think a lot of software developers are, I guess, a bit worried about generative AI right now. And the way I look at it is it just takes a lot of the difficult, mundane work of coding, takes a lot of that out of the equation. And it lets you really focus on, well, what do I really want this thing to do? And how do I want it to do it? And have I thought through all the logical steps? It just kind of takes that last step of having to actually write the code out of the process. And so I think that's a big boon because it reduces the cost of being able to develop solutions for customers. And it gives us the ability to take some of these technologies down market into markets that previously just couldn't afford to have a big team of software engineers develop a custom bespoke solution for their organization. Well, now we can reduce the cost of that enough to go out and produce solutions that are very, very cost effective that can return a positive return on investment. And I think that if you look at the trend, there are more of those use cases out there than anyone can tackle right now. So it's opened up a whole new realm of sort of possibilities, particularly in the small and medium business market, for us to go out and develop these custom solutions at a fraction of the cost. Well, that just means we're going to end up developing a whole lot more of them because the companies are seeing more and more positive return on investment on these things. So I actually see it as kind of a virtuous cycle when it comes to software engineering and software development rather than a sort of a downward spiral for software engineers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there when you talked about, well, let's go way back to the beginning of the conversation. You mentioned that you wanted to do more than just write code or be a software engineer. You wanted to solve problems and create, kind of create solutions, right? And that's what a lot of engineers want to do. And, that's the funnest part of writing code is solving a problem and seeing the results. But then when you get to that part where, now I've got to go back and, add in validation for these things and make exceptions for these things. And to have something that can kind of do that mundane work for you at the end can really add a lot of value and help you, save, half of your time to be more for the more fun and really more rewarding parts of the job, which I think is a real value.
Well, yeah, and I think there's sort of this popular notion that software engineers sit around and write code all day. And if you actually you look at the reality of it, mostly what they're writing code to do is exception handlers, right? They're trying to deal with okay, what if this goes wrong, or what if the user puts in some crazy input into this thing, right? So in my experience, software engineering is about 20% writing code and about 80% dealing with exception handling, dealing with debugging, testing, etc. All of which it's not sort of the creative process. It's not the fun part of it. 20% of it's fun, and then the 80% of it is the drudgery. So if we can get rid of a lot of that 80%, I think everyone wins.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been fun. What are any last points that you want to leave the audience with when it comes to generative AI and some of the tools that maybe you and your team might be able to help assist with in the future?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is choose the right use cases, and that's sort of that's where a lot of wisdom comes in. You just have to go play with these things, and you can get a pretty good idea of what they're good at and what they're not good at by playing with them. But you really have to get in there and just start prototyping some things, start trying some things out and see how they work. So choosing the right use cases is absolutely one of maybe the most important factor when you're looking at success versus failure with generative AI is, don't try to cram the square peg into the round hole. It won't work.
Right.
So that's kind of the first bit of advice. Second bit of advice is, think through the longer term implications. Building it is one thing, supporting it, maintaining it, optimizing it. There's these ongoing costs, but they can also actually lower the total cost of ownership. So I think, if you're going to partner with someone, make sure you're not just partnering with some guys that can build some stuff, but also can support it, can optimize it, can adapt it as technology and capabilities increase as you go forward. I think choosing the right partners is very important. And then I think the other thing is, just staying on top of it. There's so much change happening. You think about generative AI and its reasoning skills. We've gone from first or second grade reasoning skills to PhD level reasoning skills in a couple of years. And I was on a webinar the other day, and somebody said, "Yeah, look, these generative AI models, they are as dumb as they're ever going to get right now, and they're pretty smart, right? This is just the very beginning of this, right? So these things are going to get smarter and smarter. I think the cost on these is going to go down very significantly over time as we start to build hardware that is, specifically focused on this problem and reducing some of those inferencing costs." So just keeping up with it, understanding what the capabilities are and what's coming, I think that's important because that sort of informs your design and architecture decisions as you go to start to build some of these solutions. You can design them and build them in a way that's very flexible and can take advantage of additional capabilities as you go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, this has been a fun conversation. How can people connect with you online, learn more about what you're doing, and reach out if they have any questions?
Yeah, well, a couple ways. One is to drop me a line on email. It's just alexh@netsurit.com. And then also, you visit our website. We're doing some really interesting things. We're actually in the process of kind of revamping the website to reflect a lot of the new capabilities that we're bringing to the table. So you can go to netsurit.com, have a look, and feel free to reach out.
Yeah, awesome. I'll link that in the show notes too at geekleader.com so people can click through and find you there. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thanks, John. It's been a pleasure.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. And make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.